You ready? So what we're looking at here, I'm looking at Moses' course, and if you remember, this is the national foundation to receive the Messiah. So it's established originally by Jacob and Esau and Joseph and his brothers, and then Judah and Benjamin. And that was only on an individual and a family at the most sort of tribal level. But now God is trying to expand this foundation to create a national foundation to receive the Messiah. Because when the Messiah comes, it's very important there should be people who can receive him and also protect him. So it's not enough just to have a couple of individuals who follow him. You need to have a whole people who will be able to recognize him, be able to understand him and appreciate him, and then work together with him to be able to expand God's providence from a national level to a worldwide level. So that's what's going on here. So we looked at Moses' course. The first course didn't work out. Now we're looking at the second course of restoration. So at the end of last week we looked at Moses' encounter with God. God commissioned Moses and appointed him to lead the people out of Egypt, and then he gave and suggested that Aaron, his older brother, and Miriam, his older sister, could support him and help him. So they sort of formed a trinity there. So you can see, even though Moses was the younger of the three, his older brother and older sister held him in such high regard that they were willing to recognize that God was speaking through him. So you can see then that actually Moses is a very humble person. Because is it easy for an older brother and older sister to be guided by the younger brother? It's kind of difficult, isn't it? But you can see here Moses was like that. He was humble. So his older brother and sister could see his qualities, could see that God was working through him, and so they were to support him and protect him and work together with him. So Moses then that was one of the qualities, he wanted to be a very humble person. But anyway, he went off then down to Egypt. And the first thing he didn't go to see Pharaoh, the first thing he did was to go and meet the Hebrew leaders. So why do you think he went there first instead of to the palace?
Well, if we went back to the palace, he'd be killed.
Yeah, well, okay, he would get killed anyway. Why did he go to see the Hebrew leaders first?
He needs to tell them what the plan is.
And
He needs to find out what's going on as well.
To announce himself in Hebrew as well.
And
he's one of them.
so what does he need from them?
Their
It
acceptance.
needs a cooperation.
He
There's
needs
no
their,
point trying to
he needs their support.
free them from
Yeah,
slavery
that's
if
right.
they're not willing.
Yeah, he needs their support. So it says here, Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people. That was throwing the stick onto the ground, it turned into a snake and picked it up again. And they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and they worshipped. So when they realized that God cared about them, that God recognized that they were suffering and God wanted to free them and liberate them, they were moved and touched and bowed down and worshipped. So this meant that Moses then had their support. So Moses could hardly go in front of Pharaoh and say, I represent the Hebrews, if, the Pharaoh went and said, have you ever heard of this Moses guy? Does he really represent you? And if they said, no, we don't know who he is, and he doesn't represent us, then he would have just had Moses thrown into prison. So Moses then needed to have the support of the elders. He needed to have the support of the Hebrews. So he would go before Pharaoh, representing not just God, who's invisible, but representing all the Hebrews. And so that meant that the Pharaoh would have to treat Moses seriously, as opposed to just, a random individual who just walked out of the desert. He'd have to treat Moses seriously because he represented the people, the Hebrews. Yeah? That makes sense? So that's why it's very important then for Moses to get their support. It's not enough just to say, God has told me to do this. You actually have to win somebody's support. That's really important. Okay? You can't just say, well, I've been anointed and appointed, this is my job, therefore you have to do as you're told. You actually have to go and, win people's support. And really important. Okay, so after that, then Moses goes to meet the Pharaoh. And Moses says to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Israel is my firstborn son. And I told you, let my son go so he may worship me. So how does God define himself? How is God defining himself here?
Father.
Yeah, the God of Israel, but also Israel is my firstborn son. In other words, I am Israel's parent. I care. That's the reason why I care about Israel, because Israel is my firstborn son. So as God defines himself and the people as a relationship between a parent and a child, divine parent and human children. So let my son go so he may worship me. Okay? So Moses isn't saying here, let my people go and never come back. He's just saying, let my people come into the desert for 3 days to worship me. Right? It's kind of it's like a reasonable offer, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then Pharaoh says, who is the Lord that I should pay attention to him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I would not let Israel go. So Pharaoh is saying, he may be, in Egypt, in the ancient world, there were local gods. Every nation had its own gods. In Egypt, there are many gods, the god of the Nile, Ra. And so Pharaoh said, who is God? The God of Israel. I don't know them. Why should I pay any attention to them? I only worship and pay attention to the gods of Egypt. They're the only ones who have any power in Egypt and any authority in Egypt. And the God of Israel has no authority here. That kind of thing. Make sense? Mm. So, how did the Hebrews? So Pharaoh then says, right, because of that, I'm going to go and increase the people's workload. So up until then, the Hebrews had to make bricks, but the straw was provided. But now the Pharaoh said, now you have to go and collect your own straw and do everything yourself. So their workload was hugely increased. And so when this happened, and Moses went back to the Hebrews, then they said to Moses, may the Lord look upon you and judge you. You've made us a stench to the Pharaoh and his officials, have put a sword in their hands to kill us. So they were complaining to Moses, look, instead of making things better, you just made our lives a lot worse. Yeah. And sometimes things get a lot worse before they get better. Not always, but sometimes. Anyway, Moses then, it's interesting to see what Moses does. Moses returned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he's brought trouble upon his people, and you have not rescued your people at all. So how's Moses feeling about this situation with God?
It's quite frustrated.
It's not how he expected it to turn out. He thought, okay, I'll go and speak to Pharaoh, and then it's going to happen. But actually things got worse, and so Moses started getting persecuted here. So life became tough for Moses. And Moses wasn't expecting this, so he goes and talks to God about it. So this interesting thing about Moses, whatever happens, he always talks to God about it. No matter whether he's happy or he's unhappy, he's miserable or sad or angry or frustrated, he always engages in the conversation with God based upon where he's at. He's not pretending with God. He's not trying to speak to God nicely. He's just honest and open and frank with God. And tells God what he thinks. That's his kind of relationship with God, very open, honest, frank. And he starts talking to God from where he's at. You know what I mean? He's not thinking, oh, I'm not in the right mood to pray. Oh, I'm not good enough to pray at the moment. You know what I mean? Which is sometimes a temptation. But actually just talk, wherever he's at, he talks to God from that point and has engaged in conversation. Anyway, so God speaks to him, and God says to him, you are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of his country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. So what do you think about this? I will harden Pharaoh's heart. What's that all about?
What do you mean? What's that all about? Why is he hardening his heart?
Well,
what's the reason?
Well, sometimes people think, well, okay, what about freedom? Is God hardening Pharaoh's heart? Well, what about Pharaoh's freedom here? Is God interfering with Pharaoh's freedom to make choices and decisions? Sometimes what people say, an objection people make. Or sometimes they say, oh, why would God harden his heart? Why would God make everything much worse? Any ideas? What might be going on here?
I think he would harden his heart through his attitude towards what Moses has to say. If you understand what I mean.
Okay.
And I feel that, I think in a sense, I think it's hardening Pharaoh's heart. It's really bad. It's really like God saying, Pharaoh, I want you to do your worst. Because, do you know what? I've got news for you. There are incredible miracles ahead. You know that kind of attitude, really. That because I'm that I'm going to make incredible miracles that I'm going to separate these people from you. Believe it or not, because these people are actually my people anyway, my first children. So I'm going to harden your heart so that you can do your worst, but then I will liberate the people. So that I suppose in a way to also increase or make the people have much more faith in God the Creator anyway. I feel.
Anyway, and it's an interesting discussion about free will. You know, sometimes people say, well, we're completely free, and sometimes people say we're not at all free. You know, we think we're free, but all the choices we make are just a result of our chemical processes, or they're just a result of the environment and all these sorts of things, that freedom is an illusion. But it's interesting here to look at the biblical understanding of freedom and to understand what's going on in terms of how it works. So we'll have a look at these plagues, and then you can see how the Bible answers this question of whether we are free or not free, and what freedom really means, and what this hardening of the heart. Anyway, so just briefly to run through these 10 plagues. According to the Bible, there's a plague of blood, a plague of frogs, a plague of lice, a plague of flies, a plague of livestock when the livestock die, a plague of boils, a plague of hail, a plague of locusts, a plague of darkness, and then the death of the Egyptian firstborn son. So these things are all recorded in the Bible, and sometimes people say, well, did they really happen? Maybe this has all just been made up. Is there any evidence for this? All these things, God intervenes and all the extraordinary natural phenomena take place, and sometimes people say, well, did they really take place? Maybe it's all made up many, many centuries later. And then of course there's also the ethical issues which we talked about. Is it very nice of God to go and do all these dreadful things? So the first question is, did they happen? And so there is a scientific view of the plagues. This is somebody called Professor Sir Colin John Humphreys. He wrote a book called The Miracles of Exodus. He's still alive, but he used to be the Goldsmith Professor of Material Science at Cambridge University of Cambridge, and also Professor of Experimental Physics at the Royal Institution in London. So do you think he's a serious scientist?
I think so. It's serious religious and science, because some of the great scientists are also religious people.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, he's a serious scientist. He's not a he's not a charlatan. He's not a fool. Okay. So anyway, he tried to make sense. Is there a scientific explanation for what's recorded in the Bible? And he wrote a book called The Miracle of Exodus. And there's also they're going to show a YouTube video which I want to show you, which is based upon his book and includes him. Have you seen it before?
No.
Okay, I'll see if I can get it to persuade it to work.
Some of the folks in town are worried that this is a sort of plague.
So just ignore this first bit.
As in Old Testament?
This is silly.
As in God, Moses, the whole people.
Can you hear it, or should I try and plug it into the sound system?
No, it's fine. I think I can hear.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, maybe through the sound system.
Yeah, because it's. I don't know how to do that. Do you know?
Or you can just plug that.
Well, we're going to go through them. We're going to go through them one by one and see what it actually says in the Bible, one by one. So the first question is: did it really happen? If it didn't happen, then okay, well, let's move on. But if it really did happen, it's kind of interesting, I think. And then to explore this whole ethical dimension, what was really going on during this whole process of going from slavery into freedom, what was happening, and this issue of Pharaoh's heart being hardened. Okay, so of course, first question is then, well, were there miracles? If you can give a scientific explanation for what took place, then was this really a supernatural intervention by God, or what does a miracle mean then? You know what I mean? So some people say, well, if you give a scientific explanation, that means it wasn't God intervening, in which case it's not a miracle, it was just, wasn't it? Yeah. So some people, they feel they're unhappy to find out that there's a scientific explanation, because they like to think, well, it was. So supposing you were there at the time, what would you have seen? You would have seen all these things taking place, wouldn't you? And how would you have explained it?
We're being punished.
Sorry?
Probably think that we're being punished.
Yeah, I mean, the point is, did the people know, did anybody know that this volcano had exploded? Was there CNN? Was there somebody there to record it and transmit the news to Egypt? So suddenly, all these things just started to take place. And so if you were there at the time, would you have understood all the stuff that was going on? No. So, for example, in the ancient world, until very recently, why do people think volcanoes exploded?
Because of the eruptions.
Yeah, but why? I mean, until recently, why do earthquakes happen? Moving the tectonic plates. But when was that theory figured out?
Last century.
Sorry?
Last century.
Yeah, maybe about not more than 100 years ago. So before 100 years ago, when an earthquake took place, people didn't know why. Yeah? Why should suddenly the ground be shaking? And so what people are always trying to come up with explanations. So what kind of explanation would people have come up with in the pre-scientific age? The giants down there that are angry. Yes? That's what it is, isn't it? That's what people say. Oh, there must be giants living underground, in the underworld, and they're angry with us. Or the volcano exploded. Oh, there's I mean, you just read the newspaper last week. These silly tourists who got undressed and danced around naked on top of this mountain, and all the people, and there happened to be an earthquake at the same time, and some of the people attributed the earthquake to these people behaving so disrespectfully. You know what I mean? What?
Disgracing their holy ground.
Yes, but to think to connect these people dancing naked with the earthquake is like a pre-scientific point of view.
Yeah.
The question is, if they hadn't been doing that, would there have been an earthquake? Yes.
Yes.
There's no causality, it's just coincidence. Yeah? Whereas in the pre-scientific age, you think coincidence is causality, one causes the other. And this is, we're talking here, the 21st century. Yeah. Well, so you can imagine most people in the world, for most of human history, they've understood that they're natural forces, nature gods and things like that, and the mountains and the earthquakes and all these things. So you can imagine then, okay, so cast your mind back. Imagine you're a Hebrew and Egyptian 3,500 years ago, and this sequence of events took place. How would you explain it? You'd think there was you'd think there was God was working somewhere. Yes? So that's why. So when we talk about a miracle, what are we talking about?
It's something they don't understand really. Basically.
Well, sometimes if people can't understand it, then they say, well, God is doing it. Do you know what I mean? That's part of it. So in that sense, that's what you could say, that was what was going on. That's part of what was going on. So were these things natural, or was it just a coincidence? Did God cause the volcano to explode which led to the sequence of events? Was it going to explode anyway? How did Moses know all these things were going to happen? Was Moses just a brilliant climatologist and ecologist who was able to read the signs and knew what was going on? Did an angel reveal to Moses this is what's going to go on? You know what I mean? What was going on there? I don't know. These are, this is, this is Einstein. He said there are two ways to live. You can live as if nothing is a miracle, or you can live as if everything is a miracle. It's not the thing that happens in itself. A lot of it's to do with the way in which we interpret it and we see it. And sometimes people just think, oh, it was just a coincidence that we met. Whereas somebody else will say, oh, God arranged us to meet, and the spirit world was active. You know what I mean? So all you can see is you meet somebody and you might have thought about meeting them in the morning and suddenly it happens. Have you ever had these sort of experiences?
Yes.
I'm sure. We've all had these sort of experiences. Suddenly you think about somebody, pray about somebody, and then you meet them and you say, oh, I was just thinking about you. Or, and somebody picks up, phones you, and so you have to think, well, is this just coincidence? Is it the spirit world? Is it a miracle? What's going on here? All you can say is that event took place. And then how do you explain that event? Some people say it's just a coincidence, and other people would say it was God intervening, working, or the spirit world, or this or that or the other. You know what I mean? There are just different ways of making sense of it. So Einstein said, when you look at the world, from Einstein's point of view, the fact that there is a universe is a miracle. The unlikelihood of there being a universe and a world in which we can live, the likelihood of that happening is basically verging on zero. So from many scientists' point of view, they're just awestruck that the fact that there's a universe, the fact that there's a world, the fact that they're human beings is a miracle. Yeah, it's amazing. It's awesome. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way is just to think nothing is a miracle, so, I expect to, all these sort of random things to happen. Make sense? Okay, so Moses then goes on to meet Pharaoh. And Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So when it says that Pharaoh's heart became hard, why do you think it became hard? Was Pharaoh impressed by Aaron's and his snake trick?
Not really.
Why not?
Because he had his own sorcerers and he could do the same thing.
He said, okay, shrug shoulders, my sorcerers can do the same thing. So, his heart became hard. He wasn't impressed by this thing. Anyway, so Moses then said there's going to be a plague of frogs. And there was a plague of frogs. And after the plague of frogs, and Moses went to see Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh said, pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go and offer sacrifices to the Lord. Okay? So this is what Moses asked. He wanted 3 days to be able to take the Hebrews away into the desert to make sacrifices to God. So what did Pharaoh say? I will take the frogs away and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord. So Pharaoh here has made a promise, hasn't he? Yes? But then, after the frogs went, it says, when the Pharaoh saw there was relief, the frogs are gone, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. So who's hardened their heart? Who's hardened Pharaoh's heart? Who's hardened Pharaoh's heart?
Moses.
Has it? What does it say there?
That's because when you look at the corner, Satan hardens them.
No, what does the text say? What does the Bible say? Who hardened Pharaoh's heart? That's not what it says.
He did it himself. But
Yes.
He hardened his heart.
He hardened his heart. Yes. He hardened his heart. Okay? So on one hand he said, when the frogs go, I'll let your people go. But after that he changed his mind. Yes? So he said one thing, but then he changed his mind. And what happens to you when you promise something, but then you change your mind? What happens inside yourself? How do you change? Sorry? You feel guilty. And is it nice to feel guilty? No. So what if you start feeling guilty? What might you do? You can either say, "Oh, I'm really sorry," I really feel bad about it, or you can. You can what? Yeah, you can sort of harden. Well, Pharaoh made a promise and he broke his promise. He he wouldn't listen to Moses and Aaron. So what it says here, just as the Lord had said. So what God did, he predicted what Pharaoh would do. But it's Pharaoh himself who said one thing but then changed his mind. And by changing his mind, he's breaking his promise. By breaking his promise, he was corrupting his soul. Yeah? If you keep promising things but then keep breaking your promise, you're damaging who?
You damage yourself.
You damage yourself. Yeah? So Pharaoh, by making promises and then breaking the promises, he was damaging himself. He is corrupting his own soul, and he's damaging and corrupting his own heart, and he's hardening his heart. That make sense? So then Moses said, right, there's going to be a plague of gnats. And since the gnats were on the people and the animals everywhere, the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, he would not listen, just as the Lord had said. So what's going on here? The magicians then, they could do the little snake trick, but they couldn't do this trick. And so the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God. This is God who's working." So what the magician's doing? They're advising the Pharaoh, actually, this is serious business. This isn't magic. This is God. You're getting into a conflict with God here, not just with people playing magic tricks. Okay? But what did Pharaoh do? Did he listen to his magician's advice? Ignored them. So by ignoring the advice from his magicians, what was he doing? By not listening to the advice he was getting, what was he doing? He was closing himself off. He was hardening himself. Yes? And as I said, just as the Lord, so God predicted that this is what would take place. Anyway, then there were flies, as we looked at, saw. And the Pharaoh said, "I will let you go to offer sacrifices to the Lord your God." Okay, get rid of the flies and I'll let you go and offer sacrifices to the Lord your God. Moses answered, "I will pray to the Lord, and tomorrow the flies will leave. Only let Pharaoh be sure he does not act deceitfully again by not letting the people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord." So again, Moses is warning Pharaoh, don't be deceitful like you've been before. Yeah, don't change your mind. Then Moses prayed and the flies left. But this time also Pharaoh hardened his heart and would not let the people go. So you can see here, Pharaoh then, he's boxing himself in, he's becoming more and more stubborn and more obstinate. Yes? Is the Pharaoh becoming more free or less free? It's becoming less free, isn't it? When somebody is incredibly obstinate and is incredibly stubborn, you can explain to people completely logically and rationally, if you do this, this and this and this will happen. But are they open to reason and logic? They're not, yeah? So that's it. Where a free person, though, is someone who, I can understand, so I'm going to change my mind. But Moses got to the point where he could no longer change his mind. Pharaoh got to the point where he could no longer change. Yeah, he was getting hot because he broke his promises again and again. He's boxing himself into a corner, becoming more and more stubborn, more and more obstinate. And in that sense, even though Pharaoh was the most powerful man in the world, he was gradually losing his freedom. Yeah, because he could no longer act rationally anymore.
Act rationally or think rationally?
Both. He couldn't think or act rationally. And you see this sometimes, don't you? You know, you can see sometimes dictators, they get completely closed off to reality. They don't want to listen to reports about how the world really is. They only want to hear reports about how, you know, the world...
The world should be.
Yes. And Saddam Hussein, so many of these dictators, they were like that. You know, they thought they're on the brink of winning the war. Adolf Hitler and all these people, they're completely deluded. Yeah? And so obstinate, they wouldn't surrender, they wouldn't submit, they just, until the whole thing was destroyed. Yeah? Whereas a rational person realizes this is going to be a disaster, we need to do something to change. But a person who's lost their inner freedom, they become so obstinate and so stubborn that the result is always just catastrophe, disaster.
But do you think that there was any way to start what was already set in motion? If everything can be explained scientifically, then it didn't matter so much what the Pharaoh... Well, it mattered to his heart and who he was becoming as a person by continually breaking his promise. But the plague still would have happened anyway.
Yeah. They would have happened anyway, but maybe the Egyptians would have been able to respond to them better. Yeah.
I guess he became resigned. If he hadn't become resigned to everything that was happening in
Okay.
Wars, maybe he would have had better leadership.
Well, I mean, you look at the situation today, and this is just normal, it's the way the world works. You look at Greece today, okay, and the Eurozone crisis. And the fact that in Greece, as far as I understand, people can retire when they're 55 years old on a pension. And the people of Greece expect Germany and the rest of the European Union to carry on working until they're 65 or 70, and then subsidise Greek pensions so Greek people can retire when they're 55 years old and this, that and the other. You know what I mean? It's just not realistic. But they're so incredibly stubborn, refusing to change their pensions, refusing to change this, this and this and this, demanding more loans and the forgiveness of debt. You know what I'm saying? They've put themselves in a box. Eventually it's just going to be a catastrophe. Yeah? It's the same situation. You can see what's going on in Greece today with the same sort of thing that went on with Pharaoh. You know, the same kind of attitude of the people, the leaders there, the people who refuse to accept reality. Yeah.
So the Greeks were expected to retire at 55.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, we should go there.
I never saw.
But these are some of the proper things. You know, their retirement age is 55, and they refuse to raise the retirement age to the same level as in the rest of Europe. And they expect, to pay the pensions, the government needs money. The government hasn't got the money. So the Greek government wants the money to come from the EU and to be subsidised, so their pensions can be subsidised. And everybody else is thinking, well, why should you be able to retire at 55 and we have to carry on working till we're 65 to pay for your retirement pensions? You know what I mean? So, you know, you can see it's just going to the wire, and eventually, I hope, you know, Greece will leave the Eurozone, be forced out of the Eurozone, and have to swallow reality. But, you know, it's very hard for them to accept reality.
They will have to wake up and smell the coffee, as they always
Sorry?
say that. I said they will have to wake up and smell the coffee.
Yes,
Yeah.
because, I mean, as I said, what you can see going on here 3,500 years ago is just normal politics when you have leaders who refuse to accept reality and keep on until eventually it's complete catastrophe and everything collapses. It happens over and over again. You know, it happens in British politics sometimes. You know, the debt gets so huge in the 1970s, and you know, Britain had to call in the IMF to get bailed out in the 1970s under the Labour government. You know, because people thought, well, we can carry on living like this, etc. You know, reality catches up with you eventually, as individuals as well sometimes, you know, as well. Okay, so the Pharaoh hardened his heart, would not let the people go. Then you have the livestock death. Pharaoh investigated himself to see, were all these reports really true. He investigated and found that not even one of the animals the Israelites had died, yet his heart was unyielding and he would not let the people go. So you might wonder, why did it affect the Egyptian wildlife and livestock and people? But when you actually look at the map where they were, the Israelites, the Hebrews, they were living quite a long way south of where the Egyptians were living. And it's like in this country, sometimes you get a local thunderstorm and everywhere else is nice and sunny. Not everywhere was affected equally by this kind of natural catastrophes. And then there was a hail, and Pharaoh said, "This time I've sinned. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. I will let you go. You don't have to stay any longer." All right, so he looks like he's relented. Finally, he realizes. Okay. Moses replied, "But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God." So Moses realized they hadn't really got to the point of accepting reality. And when Pharaoh saw the hail had stopped, he sinned again. He and his officials hardened their hearts. So it's not just Pharaoh, but it's all the other, members of the government as well, hardening their hearts. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians, how I performed my signs among them, and how you may know that I am the Lord." So it got to this point where God realized, actually, there's no way the Pharaoh's... Hi, welcome. Yeah, certainly.
Yes.
So God Sorry, Naomi, could you just give the gentleman a glass of water, please? Thanks. Thank you. So, God had realised that it got to that point where it was just the inevitable logic of what was going on, that Pharaoh wasn't going to relent, he wasn't going to do anything. So, the principal understanding, why did God harden Pharaoh's heart? God wanted to show the Hebrews that he was God. He was the Lord of nature, doing all these incredible things. And also he wanted the Pharaoh to eventually lose his attachment to the Hebrews. So the Pharaoh the Pharaoh to get to the point where he felt these Hebrews are too much trouble. It's better just to get rid of them. And also he wanted the Hebrews to cut off their attachment to Egypt, so the Hebrews would feel, actually, that these people don't like us, let's try and go. The next plague then was the locusts, and that Pharaoh's officials said to him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?" So now finally, it's not just the Pharaoh, the Pharaohs, all his officials also realize, actually, this is a disaster. They're telling the Pharaoh, because you're so stubborn, actually the whole country has been ruined. Don't you realize what's going on? Yeah. So, but then the Pharaoh then said, "Okay, all right, go and worship the Lord your God, but tell me, who will be going?" So again, as I said, Moses is just trying to get them to go away for 3 days. And then Moses said, Moses said, we're all going. And Pharaoh said, "No, only the men are allowed to go and worship the Lord God." So again, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart and he would not let the Israelites go. So Pharaoh would only let the men go, wouldn't let the women and everybody else go. And then there was 3 days of darkness. And then Pharaoh said, "Go worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you, but only leave your flocks and herds behind." Because you can see, well, maybe they'll all disappear. And Moses said, "Our livestock too must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind." The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he was not willing to let the people go. So he's trying to bargain here. And then finally, Moses said, about this, "Every firstborn son in Egypt will die from the firstborn son of the Pharaoh." And during the night, Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and after Pharaoh's son had died, and said, "Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord. Take your..." Do you want this?
Is that right?
And so it said, "Leave my people, you and the Israelites, go worship the Lord, take your flocks and herds and go, and also bless me." What's happening there? Pharaoh says, "Before you go, bless me." Yeah?
He wants the curse to be over, the plagues to be over.
I mean, why did the Pharaoh want Moses to bless him?
He obviously feels that God is listening to Moses, and that regardless of the Pharaoh's obstinate behaviour and relentlessness in giving in to the Israelites, even though all the plagues have come and he's letting them go finally, he's still being gracious. He feels like he deserves to be blessed. I don't know.
I think that finally he's been humbled. Normally the king, normally people ask the Pharaoh to bless them. Now the Pharaoh, by asking Moses to bless him, is saying, "You are higher than me." He's treating Moses as his mediator to God in that sense. Okay, so in that sense, finally Pharaoh is recognizing the authority of the God of Israel. Yeah, and he realizes actually God is working through Moses. Moses is the prophet of God. He's finally got to the point. His spirit is broken, and he's asking Moses, "Please bless me," because he realizes without God's blessing through Moses, then he wants God's blessing through Moses. Now, supposing you're Moses, and you've gone through this incredible struggle with Pharaoh, and now Pharaoh asks you to bless him. How easy or difficult is that?
Pretty difficult.
Hmm?
Pretty difficult.
Yeah.
It's easy to say screw you.
That's right. So what kind of place does Moses need to get himself into so he could bless Pharaoh?
Forgiving.
To bless somebody, you have to what? How do you have to feel towards them?
Love.
You have to love them. You have to care about them.
Yes.
So Moses then has to love Pharaoh. Because you can't bless somebody if you don't love them and care about them. So Moses then, after this incredible battle, has to then find it within himself to love Moses, to love the Pharaoh, to care about the Pharaoh, and give God's blessing to the Pharaoh. So why is that going? Why is this dynamic taking place?
It's a classic Cain and Abel story.
Yeah?
That Cain feels a lot of resentment towards God and people in general, really. But Abel has to become more humble, and I will use the word tolerant, but more loving, really, so that they can at least find a way to love Cain anyway. So that, in a sense, Cain can receive God's love through Abel, So in a sense, Pharaoh in Cain's position has to find a way through Moses to be able to receive God's love, He cannot just receive God's love automatically. So in that sense, as you said earlier, Moses has to find a way to love Pharaoh, and then God's love will then proceed. God's love and God's forgiveness will then proceed,
But also by Moses loving Pharaoh and blessing Pharaoh, it means that Moses had no resentment towards Pharaoh. It's really important, because God wants to free the Israelites, God wants to free the Hebrews. It's not just an external freedom, going from slavery, out of slavery, leaving Egypt. They also have to be free on the inside, which means they have to be free from resentment, free from any bad feeling towards the Pharaoh or towards the Egyptians. So the Hebrews then actually have to love the Egyptians, and Moses has to love and forgive and bless the Pharaoh. So when he leaves, his heart is completely free. You know what I'm saying? Really important, this kind of whole process. It's not just about getting out of slavery, it's also an inner process as well of development. And so that's why these sorts of things are taking place. I'm just picking out little bits. There's so much more in the text if you look at it. The Israelites asked the, and this is interesting as well, the Israelites asked the Egyptians for silver and gold, and the Lord had made the Egyptians favourably disposed towards the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So again, two things here. Why did the Egyptians feel favourably disposed towards the Hebrews, such that they gave them silver and gold?
I think the Hebrews felt chastised.
Sorry?
I think the the Egyptians felt chastised. They felt how can we say that? The stress, the difficulties of the plague.
Yeah, but whose fault was this? Was it the Egyptians' fault? It was all Pharaoh's fault.
All Pharaoh's fault.
Yes, and so how do you think the Egyptians felt towards the Pharaoh?
Sorry.
Next door, go straight down. Yeah, straight away.
How do you think the Egyptians felt towards the Pharaoh?
Not happy.
You were happy, was it?
They weren't happy with him because from the Egyptians' point of view, all these disasters have come because the Pharaoh wouldn't listen to Moses and wouldn't let the people go. So they felt, Pharaoh, you brought disaster, you ruined Egypt because you've been so stubborn. So the Egyptians didn't have any good feelings towards the Pharaoh. And then the Pharaoh had been so badly treating Moses and the Hebrews, the Egyptians actually felt sorry for the Hebrews because the Hebrews had been so badly treated by the Pharaoh. You know what I'm saying? This is how this sort of dynamic develops. So the Egyptians then, they want to give things to the Hebrews because they feel sorry for the Hebrews because they've been so unfairly and unjustly treated by the Pharaoh. You know what I'm saying? And so if the Egyptians give gold and silver to the Hebrews and anything they ask for, how do the Hebrews feel towards the ordinary Egyptians? Do they have any bad feeling towards them? No. So the Hebrews then, the Israelites, they leave Egypt without any bad feeling towards the Egyptians. Really important. Okay? So they're internal, the inside they're free. They're free from resentment or bitterness or anything. They just feel love and compassion for the Egyptians. And so throughout the Old Testament stories, there's never any sense of antagonism towards Egypt or the Egyptians. You don't get that at all within the Old Testament. It's just absent. So this is very important. This Exodus then is not just leaving Egypt and slavery, but also the inner state. They have to be in this inner state of inner freedom as well. Make sense?
Yes. And also, just to bring this to modern times, we have this Middle East conflicts, and it's very interesting to see that modern day Israel and modern day Egypt basically have a very good relationship. And wouldn't want to say that this relationship must have been forged all those years ago, really, so that today there can be peace between modern day Egypt and modern day Israel, really, where there is still conflict between Israel and other countries like Palestine anyway, and other countries in the Middle East. I feel like it's like the relationship that was formed between Benjamin and Judah. So they have the two tribes to stay together when the whole thing split up, when the 10 tribes split up in the north and the 2 tribes in the south, So I feel like spiritually many years ago, because Egypt in a sense actually protected Israel, they protected Jesus, they protected Moses, So I felt like in some way, conditions were made all those years ago for modern day Egypt and modern day Israel to be at peace with each other. It's just a thought that struck me anyway.
Yeah, there was a sense that there was a reason for the Egyptians to feel this way towards the Hebrews because they were foreigners, they were most prosperous, etc. There was some legitimate complaints in that sense. Can I unskype myself? Okay, so then there was the Passover, and which happened this time when the Egyptians' firstborn died, and God said to roast the lamb and to put some blood from the lamb on the lintels, the doorposts, and then they were to make unleavened bread for when they went on this journey. So unleavened bread is bread which you make without yeast, so it doesn't rise. So it means it's very, very flat, which means you can take lots of it very easily. Whereas if you've got loaves of bread made from yeast, it takes up a lot of space. It's very hard to carry very much because it's so spacious. And then it says then the angel of death passed over. That's where the name comes from. So the angel of death passed over all the houses in Egypt, and when there was a house with the blood on the lintel, the angel of death didn't go in with the Hebrews, and the angel of death only went into the houses of the Egyptians. And so the Egyptians then they gave clothing, jewelry and clothing, and finally Pharaoh allowed them to depart for 3 days. Yeah? And imagine all this effort for 3 days. You know what I'm saying? It was really difficult. You know, it wasn't that Moses was saying let my people go forever. It's just let them go into the desert for 3 days. That's how difficult it was to deal with a Pharaoh. They couldn't even get a 3-day holiday to go and make offerings to God and worship God. And so, where was all this taking place? Well, this is this area here. Understand this is where the Pharaoh hung out here, and the land of the Israelites, the Hebrews, was lower down, and so then they went down here, and so they went for 3 days, and the idea is they got to here by 3 days, Sukkot, and then they carried on travelling. And so sometimes people say they crossed the Red Sea. Well, the Red Sea is too huge, that's impossible. Just look at... It's not even appearing now for me to cancel it. How can I stop it? There we are. Turn on the sound. Oh, she's up there. How can I close it? How can I cancel that? This was in Finland. There we are. Okay, so another idea is that, I lost my pointer now. Right. So sometimes people say they cross the Reed Sea a little bit here, it's a sort of marshy area here. But when you actually read the text, it seems that it took them a week, 7 days to get from here to here, before they crossed over this Red Sea. And they would have taken 3 days to get here, and then the best explanation I've come across is that they then carried on travelling here until they got to this point here. And this thing here is called the Gulf of Aqaba, and this is where Mount Sinai probably is. This is Midian where Moses used to hang out. And so over this point here, between these two places here, there's the remains of a land bridge. So for example, you know off Cornwall there's the Mount Saint Michel, St. Michael's Mount. When the tide goes down, you can walk across, and tide comes in, it's covered up. Well, over there, there's also an ancient land bridge. And there's 2 towns on either side here. And so the idea is, best explanation, there's 2 ancient remains of 2 ancient towns, one on this side and one on that side. And the remains of a land bridge here. They've done some archaeological work and they've found sort of Egyptian chariots and things like that. So the best explanation I've come across is that's where the crossing was. And so it's quite possible that this is where the crossing was, and this tide might have gone out a very long way, and they could cross over, then the tide might have come in and drowned all the Egyptians. So anyway, according to the Bible, they're led from Egypt by a pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, and Pharaoh chased them, the people lose heart, and then Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you'll see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, but you must remain silent." So they stop complaining. Moses stretched out his rod, and the sea parted, and they crossed over. And it says that the Israelites saw the great power that the Lord had unleashed against Egypt. The people were in awe of God. They believed in God and his servant Moses. So this incredible phenomenon took place. And so then the water came back and the Egyptians were engulfed. And then they went on to this wilderness of Shur. So again, one has to think, well, how does this happen? This parting of the Dead Sea, Red Sea, must be some kind of realistic explanation. And I can imagine that Moses for 40 years been wandering around the wilderness of Midian with Jethro, and so he would have known all the features and all the phenomena that took place, and he must have known what the tides were like, and about this land bridge comes up at this particular time, and this, that, and the other. So I'm sure, he would have been able to work out what was going on, to act in that kind of way. And then they ran out of water, or they got to a place called Marah. They'd run out of water. They had 7 days of supplies for eating and drinking, but now they'd run out of water to drink. So they went to this lake in Marah, and it's bitter, so you couldn't drink it. So it says Moses told them to take a particular tree and throw it into the water, and the water became sweet. So again, obviously there's some kind of quality that this particular kind of tree had that Moses knew about, and he knew if you threw this kind of tree into the lake, then it would change the taste or whatever it was. So I think Moses, he was just very with it. He just knew the way things were. He just understood the environment in which he was operating very well. So some of these things were miraculous, and some of these things, were based on his wisdom. You could say.
That region for 40 years.
Yeah.
So
he lived in that region for 40 years, so
very well.
he knew it like the back of his hand. He knew where to go, and he knew this and knew that, I'm sure, very, very well.
Was there a tour guide? Was there a tour guide?
Yeah, like that tour guide, that's right. I guess something like that. Okay, it's 8:30, should we stop there?
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
And carry on next week.
And it's